We're coming back to talk about the Second Amendment, gun rights, all sorts of mischievous activity. Principally, I want to focus now on Capitol Hill. Rachel, I'd like to have your insights with respect to all sorts of efforts in this newly returning Congress to address things like red flag laws. I don't think people even understand what a red flag law is. I don't even think the people on the Hill do. But there's a lot of different initiatives going on. Kind of bring us up to speed on what's the latest.
Well, the Democrat House is going to do what we expect, which is kind of go to the extreme on a lot of these issues and I think pass a lot of messaging legislation that they don't expect to go anywhere in the Senate. But what is going on among Senate Republicans, I think, is of concern to people that are interested in this issue. You are starting to see some Senate Republicans come out in support of red flag laws. There is legislation out there that would incentivize red flag laws at the state level, and that is co-sponsored by people like Marco Rubio, Republican from Florida, Rick Scott, also the same state senator from Florida, John Cornyn, who was formerly in the Senate Republican leadership, is also a co-sponsor of that legislation. And you have efforts from Senator Pat Toomey of Pennsylvania, working with Joe Manchin, the Democrat from West Virginia, to expand background checks. And this is something we saw them roll out a couple of years ago, and now they're back at it. And they are in active discussions with the White House. And so I think for people interested in this issue, it is a moving target, to go with the metaphor. And so I think if they're interested in this issue, this is something they need to speak up about.
So something I find particularly offensive with respect to the red flag laws is that that's a cute little sort of term or phrase that's used. I don't think anyone really knows what it means. What is precisely being proposed? What is the red flag? How is it? And then how is a I mean, look, there are protective orders statutes out there, at the county and state level across the country. If someone has a reasonable fear for their safety, their security, their life, they know that someone is a danger, you can go to any court, you can go to the police, you can make a claim, and there's actions already in place for protective orders. How is a red flag law different? What does that mean?
Well, so this is the key question, is how this is going to look at the federal level, because we see red flag laws across the country. It's something like 17 states now have red flag laws. And the critical question is one of due process. Because in many of these states, what happens is anyone that can be concerned, a teacher, a parent, a friend, and can make a recommendation that this person's guns be taken away. And that is then carried out in something called an ex parte hearing. That person doesn't even have to be present to defend themselves, to be present while their constitutional rights are being stripped away. Again, no crime has been committed. So this sets up a scenario where the government is stripping you of a right before you even commit a crime, if you're even going to commit a crime.
Right, this is something out of an old movie, The Minority Report, right?
Right.
With the precogs, with the precognition people would know that you're going to do something bad. I mean, the other part of this, frankly, is also we've seen people a few years back, swatting was very popular, where people would make fake phone calls to the police alleging some hostage situation, and the SWAT team would show up in front of some innocent person's house on the false premise that there was some horrific thing going on. I mean, I see this being used, and I know of an instance in particular where one politician running against another filed a protective order just to embarrass or kind of jam up the politician in their campaign. I mean, this is so ripe for abuse, for denial of constitutional rights, due process. Cam, does this even have a chance of flying?
Well, unfortunately, I think it does have a chance of flying because politicians want to do something. And many politicians feel like this is the least bad option because it's not going after everybody. It's not taking anybody's guns away, entirely, right?
Yeah.
You can have your firearm restored, exactly. So but again, the people who are pushing this are gun control advocates. And my biggest problem, yes, I have due process concerns, but my biggest problem is, so you're telling me that a judge is going to determine, based on whatever standard of review, that somebody is likely to be a danger to themselves or others, and then we're going to go and we're going to take their guns from them, and then we're going to leave them alone in their house with their car keys and their can of gas and their pills and their knives, and we're going to think that that actually solved the problem? That's ridiculous. To me, red flag laws are fundamentally unserious solutions to a very serious issue. If there is somebody who is in a crisis and who needs to be removed from their firearms, remove them from their firearms, put them in a place where they will be safe. But don't go after the inanimate objects and think that makes everything better.
Right, I mean, because the same argument, as you pointed out, you would have to seize their vehicle because they could drive through a mall and create
Right.
untold
Well,
havoc.
they can hang themselves,
And we
like
have
Jeffrey Epstein. There are so many ways that people can kill themselves.
And we have civil commitment laws in this country in all 50 states. And I've yet to see a scenario where a red flag law or an emergency gun violence restraining order would be more appropriate than using the existing levers of civil commitment or the criminal justice system.
Rachel, is the Surrender Caucus going to give in on this and just roll over and play dead?
It is in a dangerous way right now. There is a lot of that feeling of we must do something on Capitol Hill, particularly in the Senate. And I think these red flag laws are gaining a lot of popularity because, people, again, this hysteria of the need to do something is overwhelming.
As we close out, John.
Yeah, look, as has been mentioned, we have civil commitment laws, Baker Acts. Change that in some way. Those have all sorts of protections there. You have to see a mental health care expert in the evaluation. Red flag laws, despite the mental health care discussions, has no requirements that mental health care experts involved. But one thing that hasn't been addressed is you can actually accomplish the opposite, make suicide more likely with red flag laws. I'll give an example for somebody that Cam knows well also, and that is, I know a woman who's being stalked. Her husband was murdered right in front of her. She was incredibly depressed afterwards. She had concerns about even seeing a psychiatrist or a psychologist after the attack because she was worried that her guns would be taken away from her. What happens when you have red flag laws? You would be afraid to go, she would have been afraid to go and talk to friends or relatives for fear that even a well-meaning person would be concerned that she's depressed and that she would have her gun taken away. So this person who had killed her husband, she could be at risk. And you make the problem worse if people are afraid to even share their feelings, if they can't even talk to those around them. It's just not somebody like her. Police officers are depressed constantly on the job. Would we really be in a better world where people can't share their feelings because they're afraid? Police officer, he has his gun taken away, he loses his job at that point. And liberals understand this in other contexts. If you were to say we're going to have a list of people with AIDS, they would go and say, well, you can't do that because that will discourage people from getting testing and treatment. But somehow when it comes to guns, that type of logic that they have, that they can be these perverse consequences for these things, are things that they never think about.